the drug decriminalisation debate has returned, as it does, with monotonous regularity. Or maybe for you it's not monotonous. And it's one of those debates where there are some very good arguments on both sides. Which side are you on? Or are you on the fence? It's all a matter of how you define the drugs, I suppose. If we should have prohibition on most of the drugs, then why don't we have prohibition on alcohol? Supposing there were no drugs in society and someone turned up and said, well, I've got this stuff called methamphetamine, and someone said, I've got alcohol, I'd like to sell it to people. Another one has cannabis, and we got the authorities to check them out. They wouldn't allow any of them on the scene. Methamphetamine, certainly not. Instant addiction. Then they'd look at alcohol. Not so much the instant addiction, but about 1 out of 10 is likely to have a problem with it. It seems to be the preferred drug of the wife bashers and of the bad drivers. Then you'd have cannabis. 1 in 10 could have psychiatric problems with heavy use. And you might get the amotivational syndrome for many heavy users, where they just don't feel like working too hard, and they figure their parents work themselves into an early heart attack, and they're not going to do it, so I guess that's the hippie syndrome. You'd have problems with them all, but you'd be more likely to ban alcohol than you would ban cannabis. Now, there's something about the cannabis that's around at the moment that many people don't know. It's a big problem with the genetic modification of it. It is apparently providing a shortcut to the psychiatric clinic. Psychosis in many of its users. I don't know if the figure is 1 in 10. It might be 1 in 5. But obviously there is a problem. And what most people don't realise is that the problem is in the greedy producers. Forget the criminality for a moment. They are harvesting it too early, I'm advised. The plant itself has the ability to provide an antidote to those psychotic episodes, but only if it's harvested a bit later, when it's finished doing whatever maturing it has to do. Then it will provide the alternative mental state that is being sought without the paranoia that is associated with it. But it has to be harvested later. And if you're in organised crime, you're not going to sit around and wait. You want to get the stuff out in the street as soon as you can, so they harvest it early, and countless kids have psychotic episodes because it hasn't been checked by the government. If the government were to check this kind of thing, then perhaps we wouldn't have this problem. But first we have to look at what's happened in Canberra and in South Australia, where they've decriminalised the drug for several years. I'm not aware of what changes they've been through, if they've been through any at all. Perhaps that's where a panel of expert listeners can come in. That will give us some idea of what happens if you decriminalise one popular drug. But generally, most of them are so dangerous or so risky that even if they legalise them all tomorrow, I certainly wouldn't want to try them. They carry inside them their own penalty. The loss of your mind, or the loss of limbs if you have a car crash as a result of driving while intoxicated. And if they carry their own penalty, why do you have to add on a fine or a few days or a few weeks in jail on top of all that? The penalties that the drugs provide are far worse than anything that's meted out by the courts. Now we don't have the death penalty or the cane. And if the drug is not doing you any harm, if it is really a victimless crime, then why the hell is it banned? It's banned because organised crime wants it that way. The biggest hit on organised crime would be to bring these things under government control, have them perhaps available from pharmacies on prescription. Remember 100 years ago, in fact I think it was less than 100 years ago, heroin was available from pharmacies. And the vast majority of people didn't use it because they heard it could be addictive. There were very few addicts. And a whole lot of the stuff that's banned today was available over the counter or in your backyard, and it wasn't a big problem. But then we had a lot of discipline. We had the chaperoning of young people. there weren't many opportunities for them to go off and experiment on their own. Now they've taken the parents' rights to discipline the children away. They've taken chaperoning out of the culture. Well, no wonder, even with penalties, they can't stop the consumption of drugs and they can't stop the supply. Too much money is involved. They say that about 80% of the prisoners in our jails are there for drug-related crimes. It's costing society a mozza to play this strange charade for the benefit of a handful of do-gooders who just don't understand how the system works, and also a very large handful of characters who are making many millions of dollars in their very organised criminal enterprise. But Julia Gillard says she won't have any. Oh, they must have laughed about that when the mics were turned off and they were back at the lodge. Back in the Whitlam days, lots of the people in government at the time were imbibing illegal substances, and for all I know, they may still be doing it down in Canberra. But then again, they can do it in Canberra. Maybe that's why they decriminalised it, so the politicians wouldn't be put in the panty wagon for using dope. That would explain it, wouldn't it? You must have an opinion on this, whichever side of the fence you're on. I'm not on the side of organised crime. I figure these things carry their own penalty. And I'm just not interested in them because I would rather drive. And I would not like to lose my licence. So that sorts that one out. Perhaps when I'm really old and I don't have a licence and I don't have a car, then I might ask the doctor, what are the alternatives that will make old age a little less frightening? And the doctor might advise some of these things. Who knows, they might have some things decriminalised by then. And if I had a serious disease and some serious pain, I would want to be able to get heroin over the counter, like my great-grandparents were able to. Unbelievable that you can easily get something on the street when you really don't deserve it, and it's illegal, but those who really deserve it, who really need something to fix the pain, are not allowed to have it. All because organised crime has got our politicians by the you-know-whats. And every so often they give them a bit of a twist. Don't you dare think of legalising it. And the do-gooders, who I'm sure are not in the pocket of organised crime, are helping them unwittingly. Well, let's go all the way. If you want to ban things, let's ban alcohol. See what happens. See what happens when they had prohibition in the 1920s in the United States. It gave people like Al Capone a big leg up into what became very, very organised crime. You had the Kennedy dynasty. They made a heap of money out of running moonshine liquor, and they even got one of theirs. They got at least one in the Senate, and they got one in the very top job as president. I'm not saying that he was running the moonshine liquor, but he came from a very wealthy family that's made its money during Prohibition. Pretty outrageous. If only the do-gooders knew what really went on behind the scenes. And a big story here that came up only a couple of weeks ago, as a matter of fact. Better late than never. Story from Johannesburg, from Xinhua News, the Chinese news agency. The South African government is to endorse the Chinese renminbi as the new global currency during the incoming BRICS summit in India. The South African government, they say, will take some steps in the BRICS summit to challenge the US dollar's supremacy in the world financial structure, especially in the trade and investment in the emerging markets, according to the South African Sunday newspaper City Press. This was reported on the 25th of March. Using the Chinese currency, which we would call yuan, but they also call it renminbi, which means people's money, using that instead of US dollars will benefit African businesses to do business with other BRICS memberships by lowering dealing costs in Africa, lowering the trade barriers. And this was reported by the South Africa's largest bank, Standard Bank, in its research report. So the BRICS summit was held at the end of March, on the 28th and 29th, that's last week, in New Delhi, the Indian capital. BRICS consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa.